You're listening to My Inner Teacher with Peter Starius and Crystal Ariel. The answers you seek are within you.
Also, we know that now we're going to capture all this good. Yeah, I wanted to start by why I asked you to be here because we first met. I think it was in Miami, but I don't remember. It was in Miami, right? Something to do with Fred Bush, maybe?
Yeah, I spent most of my time back then. If it was over a decade ago, most of what I did, I traveled a little bit, but most of what I was doing was in Miami. I'm pretty sure I remember it in Miami.
Okay. And I remember even back then, you were doing all this weird, unorthodox, super cool, and like anything but ordinary type movements. And it's always been very interesting to me. And being able to witness that over these years has been really, really beautiful. Like you clearly have your own inner teacher, your own voice that you've been following for a while. So I wanted to start by asking you, like, what was the traditional practice that started you on this path? And then when did you pivot into like, all right, now I'm doing my own thing?
I think I was blessed with ignorance and naivete. I think there's a grace to that. I didn't come into yoga as a young man. Well, it's all relative. I came into yoga later in life. I was in my late 30s when I took my first yoga class. I didn't even enjoy it that much, but something in me kept moving me towards some kind of physical practice for some of the work that I was already, I call it work now. I didn't realize it as work then. Some of the interests that I had in philosophy and searching through all our traditions, both our Western traditions, but and our Eastern traditions. But things that I was reading were guiding me towards there needs to be some kind of embodiment aspect to what this is. And I'd found a Ram Dass. It wasn't Be Here Now, but it was a Ram Dass book where it was just a book with a couple pictures in it, hand drawings of him doing some sun salutations or something like that, or some stretches. And I would just go through that book and I would do that, not knowing what I was doing. Um, and then I was also kind of considering Tai Chi, but Tai Chi was difficult to find in my area. Yoga was easier to find, and there was a yoga training within like a week and a half of when I looked into it. And for some reason, I mean, I wish I had a better answer of some. Well, this is this is how I thought this out, and this is why I did it. But I have very little idea about what brought me to that, especially not enjoying my first yoga class. And the teacher that was running that training was Ashtangi, and also did some work with Shivananda. So that was his background, and then one of the teachers that he brought in was also Ashtangi. And I was a good student. I didn't realize that everybody was going to know so much more than me in that room. I couldn't hold a lunge. I thought I was pretty physically fit. I couldn't hold a lunge. I didn't understand any of the Sanskrit, so I actually had a notebook and I would do lines of the Sanskrit names of the poses to try to memorize them. And I was just trying to get by and trying to pass this course. The Ashtanga teacher that was there, my teacher told me later on that, I mean, I was so far behind everybody else, so uh this was strange to me that she said this. And she told him, after she had met all of us and she had come in for a while, and she told him, keep an eye on him. There's something in him that's trying to speak. Keep an eye on him. I don't know what it is. And he told me that, and I think that was inspiring. Since I didn't know what, I still felt completely lost, but at least it was inspiring. And from then, a teacher started to work at the studio that I was doing the training in, and we had free classes available. And I heard everybody talking about going to this young guy's class, and being fascinated with his teaching. And I went to his class after I graduated, and his name was I say was because he passed away a couple years ago. Young guy. He was 10 years younger than me. I called him my big little brother, or my younger big brother. I took his class, and in the training that I did, even though I intellectually, propositionally understood sort of the philosophy that I was being taught, I understood um, the general guidelines and alignments of the movement, I didn't feel the connection of these things. These things to me were alien and disconnected from each other. But I took Jason's class, and without any heavy philosophy, without without excessive alignment, without any heavy-handedness at all, just helping guide our bodies in certain ways and in certain engagements. Uh, I felt something. I felt connected to possibly what some of the philosophy was trying to point at. And Jason was an Anusara teacher. He had trained with John Friend. This was towards the end of Anusara, so he had separated from the practice. But that 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 felt like something that felt real to me. So I started showing up at Jason's classes as much as I could, and I would show up with notebooks. And he would teach something in the class, and I'd come and show up early at the next class that he had, and I'd be like, well, last week you said this, and so I went and I tried this, and this is what happened. What should I do now? Like I felt this, I didn't, and he would like smile and very gracious, and he'd be like, well, this. Like, okay, great. And I would go to his class, and then I was teaching at that time. They gave me a class. I don't know why, but all I was trying to do was stay as close. If I could just say what Jason would say, as close to what he would say as possible, even though I didn't understand it, hopefully something from him would go through me, and it worked. It worked. I mean, people were enjoying my classes. I didn't know what I was doing, but I had this guy that I was trying to mimic and learn from. And every week, man, I would show up and I'd ask him questions, and I thought I was annoying him, and he would just smile and giggle. And eventually he asked me, like, what I didn't know is that what was happening was, he told me later that my questions were getting better and better, and his capacity to answer them were getting less and less, which told him like this was something special that was happening between us, because I was starting to push him to question some of the things that he was doing. Eventually he asked me to start to sub some of his classes. And Peter, have you ever, in your long career, have you ever been asked to sub a class of a very popular teacher?
Oh, of course.
It's
Yeah.
the worst. It's the worst thing in the world, because
Yeah, 'cause-
nobody wants to see your face. If they see your face coming in, like, they'll smile because they're polite, but it's kind of like, oh, you're teaching today? Hey,
Right.
then people would leave the room, because Jason was very, very popular as a teacher. People would leave the room, but I'm like, are you sure you want me to do this? He's like, yeah. I asked him, look, I need to know more. What can I do? Are you teaching a teacher training? I can't afford it. I already did one, but if you'll let me, I'll do, I'll help you out. If you could just let me sit in the back, I'll just sit in the back. I'll be quiet. I won't bother you, And he had just started a teacher training. He's like, well, look, I just started one, but this first part of it, it's not really going to be that interesting to you. So I'll let you know, when to come in. So I'm like, okay, great. So I'm waiting, and I'm waiting on my phone, and he wouldn't call, and he wouldn't message me. And I just see the days going by on the training, and I would ask him. He's like, no, well, I'll let you know. Like, okay, I'm getting nervous now. I feel like I'm bothering him. And like one day I'm like, hey, he's like, yeah, if you come tomorrow, come in, sit. So I got there early. Didn't want to be disruptive. Sat in the back, grabbed my notebook, and made myself I'm not a big person, but made myself small as I could in the back of the room. And Jason walks in, and he sits down, and he sees me all the way at the back corner of a large room at Green Monkey at the time. And he's like, what are you doing over there? It's like, come over here. Okay. And I was like, sit next to me. All right. Sit next to you. He starts teaching, and as he starts teaching, he's giving us things to do, and he breaks everybody up in two groups, and he's like, well, I'll take this group, and Carlos, you take that group. And what I didn't realize is he was already kind of helping me without realizing it to become his partner. And that was the first training that we did together. And eventually we did a few trainings together. We started what later became Fluidus together. He was also doing physical therapy for spinal surgery rehab patients. His father and his sister are both surgeons, and he would get their patients and he would run them through these different sequences. And what I was seeing was that the things that we were running these patients through in order to improve their spinal health and to get them moving again and to bring their nervous system back online was very different from the alignments that I had learned traditionally, or at least, the game of telephone that has come down as tradition to us. And I started to have a difficult time teaching some of the things that I had been taught, when I know that what we were doing to the people that really needed help in their bodies was something very different, completely different philosophy. So that continued this questioning of what is it that I'm doing? What is it that yoga as a physical practice is? And what is the reality of where these practices come from?
What a
Wow,
journey.
indeed.
I have so many questions for you. Yeah. Do you know anything about my story, about my path to being a teacher?
I read a little bit, but please remind me. Yeah, I read a little bit after I knew we were going to do this together.
So I had a similar relationship with a teacher, but he wasn't younger. He was 10 years older. And I had a notebook just like you had, and I still have the notebook, some of the notebooks here. And because he had a thick Hungarian accent, and I only caught half of the words that he was saying, I would go back and look at these notes, and they almost made no sense to me. But there was a seed planted in those notes that I ended up writing a book about. The relationship, though, was over 20 years, and we eventually, I was traveling with him, and we'd travel around North and South America together for 3 months. We were literally like a couple traveling for 3 months. We'd share hotel rooms or share, guest bedrooms in people's houses, when we didn't have the money to have a hotel. And he would have a program 6 a.m. every morning for the students, but we'd get up at 3 a.m. and practice from 4 to 6 before he started teaching. And some mornings he would just say, watch, sit in the corner and watch. And it was those mornings that I sat in the corner and watched where I feel this nonverbal exchange taking place that, again, I didn't fully understand this transference that was happening. And yet those are the moments that have stuck with me. Very few of his words are with me anymore. But the transmission and the understanding of the subtle body has become part of me, and I teach from that place now. And the last year of our training together, working together, I was getting impatient because he was doing all these esoteric practices, these kriyas that were reserved for who knows who, but he always kind of implied that they were for people that had mastered, reached a certain level of mastery. And I had put 20 years of my life into studying with him. I did all the advanced practices except these few kriyas. And so he was coming to the States from Europe. He was going to stay at my house for a month. And I sent him this message, or left a message on his answering machine. Hey, I want to learn the good stuff. This is it, teach me. And I get this 2 weeks later, I get this right. Yes, it's time we talk. And so at the talk, and finally, when the talk arrives, we're sitting on a park bench. He's about to get on a plane. And I'm thinking, well, how is this going to work? He's got 30 minutes before we have to go to the airport. What is he going to teach me? And he said, after this long silence, Peter, there's two things in life you never want to be: an apprentice or a soldier. And I'm like, I was a shock, those words. I didn't quite understand how they applied to me. But there was adrenaline, that fear of what's coming next just lit up my, sympathetic nervous system. The adrenaline was pumping, and he can see that I'm like struggling to speak. And he says his next words, perfect words, knowing him, it's time to get off the tit. So that moment was just a collapse of all the structure that I had built in my life that made me feel worthy and safe, and like what I was teaching was valuable. And so from that moment of shock, he stands up, he says, I got to get the taxi. We walk 2 blocks to my house in silence. He goes in, gets his luggage. He comes back out without even acknowledging that I'm standing on the porch. The taxi's there. He puts his bag in the trunk, and he's walking around to get in the back seat, and he stops, door open, stops, turns around. And that look in his eyes, I thought, oh God, he's going to say something like, okay, I was kidding, or, no, I still want you to come. And his words were this: oh, by the way, don't teach anything I ever taught you. And that just like, it made it crystal clear to me in that moment, this was the end. This was chapter, book closed, time to move out on your own. And in hindsight, it took years for me to fully process that. But in hindsight, he saw something in me. This is what I believe now. He saw something in me that needed something strong and abrupt to get me out of my comfort zone. And it worked. It worked. And it wasn't an easy process. It took me, I'd say, at least 5 years to develop what I would call now, what I'm teaching now, this idea of levity yoga. And it took me another 5 to 10 years to figure out what to call it, because I didn't have a way to speak about it to people other than what I had gone through. And breaking my back was what catalyzed me into an awareness of this word levity that ultimately gave me something to place a label on of what I teach and what I call levity yoga. But it's not I mean, I can just feel it in you. These insights take a level of discomfort, to arrive at. And I'm very curious about what gave you this motivation to focus on the inner teacher. Like it sounds like you were with a teacher, a quality, respectful teacher, and then you weren't. And that transition, can you talk more about that transition?
Sure. Um, there's so much in what you said too, but we'll start there. We'll start there. Again, it wasn't. I don't think it's ever a choice. Like you said, something abrupt needs to happen, and Jason and I were very comfortable together as eventually partners, and we were playing stuff off of each other, but we would teach for each other, uh, substitute for each other. We would do trainings together, and I met my wife at that time, and he was with someone at that time as well, and my wife and I were leaving Miami. We were leaving Miami. We wanted to move to the mountains at that time, and we both had such a big following at that time in Miami, and I was like, well, my students are gonna like hate this. I mean, you kind of become family with your students, but at least Jason is still here. Jason will still be here. I can give my students over to him. They'll love him. They can continue what Jason and I have started to build together. So the day comes, I'm going to tell Jason, and it's after his class, because we would take each other's classes as well. So it was after his class, and I went up to him and I'm like, look, I got something to tell you. He's like, what is it? And like, Devin and I are moving to North Carolina. And then he's like, when? I'm like, in a couple weeks. And he starts laughing. He's like, oh shit. I'm like, what's going on? He's like, I'm moving to Salt Lake City. I'm like, when? He's like, in a couple weeks. So we both, I mean, it was that abrupt, and the thing that we had started, that comfort that we had built with each other in Miami, quickly went away. Our students hated it, but he's like, well, they'll find their way eventually. And we did some stuff at the beginning, but eventually he found a life over there. He found a studio over there. He continued to teach what we had started together, but something in me kept going. Something in me, and there was, at that point, I had been in the yoga world for a little while, and I was so disillusioned by the fluff of it, and the pretension of it, and this lack of deep connection to the questions, and living the questions, and trying to discover what actually is going on. And everybody felt like they chose a team, and you just kind of, like when you choose a sports team, you're not really logically thinking, well, I chose this team because it's best. It's like you make an emotional decision, and then you back that emotional decision with a lot of times irrational things. And I kept asking these questions, the questions that I started to ask with Jason. I didn't understand some of the things that we were doing, and I didn't understand why we were teaching things the way that we were. So I started to travel more. I started to find out senior teachers, Christina Sell, who was, an amazing, I mean, one of the senior Iyengar teacher. She did Ashtanga. She was an Anusara teacher. Fantastic. So I went over there, and I trained with her a little bit. But again, she had her thing, and it was there, and the box felt very small for what I was experiencing in my body, and taking the work that Jason and I had done, and continuing to move it forward. While at the beginning, I didn't know that I was stepping on any toes, or challenging any. I mean, I wasn't out to challenge dogma. I just wanted to know, like a little kid that just asks, like, why? Like, but why? But why? But why? And you get to a certain point that there's no answering the why anymore, because the parents just don't know. But that was, thank God, unsatisfying to me. The things that I was experiencing in the physical practice, I couldn't find anyone to truly give me a satisfying answer to what it was that I was experiencing, what it was that I was feeling, what are the physical connections, what is going on here. So I continued. At this point, I was on my own, in Asheville, at that time in a basement apartment, and I would come down to my basement where it was freezing cold, and I would move, and I would jot down questions, and I would look up as many books as I could. And some of the books that I would try to read were way beyond my my capacity to read, so I would have to like go back a book to try to teach me how to read this book on anatomy, and like that one was still over my head, so I had to go back to another book. So I would read this book in order to be able to read this book, to pick up the vocabulary, to be able to understand what this book was saying. And I started to do that. And uh, I mean, fascia was not popular. You know, now everybody has an idea of what fascia is, but back then it wasn't that way. And I mean, this was the first time that I came across some kind of concept that matched some of the experiences. Like, what is this living thing that I'm contacting in the body, which is I. Obviously, it's me as the body, but it's not the I that I'm familiar with. It's almost as if there's an other that's not other, that's in me too. There's some communication going on in the depths here. And that's what it feels like. It feels like a dialogue with something greater than I am, older than I am. And it started to feel like I was doing the work of what the old yogis were doing, before they had, structure, where you go into a vinyasa class. It's like, well, here's how vinyasa is. You go and here's the sequence. It's like these guys that would go out into the woods, and it wasn't as if they were coming up with movements intellectually and then, trying to make them in their bodies. It was backwards. It was ritual that came first, just like myth. Like, no one wrote myth. No one truly wrote the real fairy tales. Like, these were stories and these were physical practices that, if anything, it was the other way around. Like, they possessed us. They wrote themselves through us. Like, we became tools of these rituals and these movements and these practices. I think Jung talks about this tribe in Africa that he went to visit, and they would spit on their hand. They would spit on their hands and rub their eyes and look up at the morning sun. And he asked them, was like, why do you do this? And they're like, because we've always done this. It's meaning doesn't come first. Like, intellectual meaning doesn't come first. Intellectual meaning is something that we lag behind with, and we try to make intellectual left brain kind of sense of something that's living and is trying to speak through us. And I mean, these are the experiences that I was having, but I had no context at the time. I was laughing when you were talking about your teacher and you watching and you wanting to know. Jason told us a similar story about his philosophy teacher, that Douglas Brooks, who went to India and sat, with his appa, with his guru. And as a young man, I think just out of grad school or something like that, he sat in front of this guy, Sanskrit scholar, but also, a jnana yogi, and, very powerful little man. And he's like, and then appa sits down in front of him and he's like, well, young man, what can I help you with? And Douglas, in his early 20s, looks at him, he's like, I want to know everything you know. And at that age, Abba just smiles and kicks back. He's like, well, that's going to take a little while, and that just in that soft, sweet voice. And I feel like some of I don't know what else to call them. Some of the revelations that I was graced. There's people that are smarter than me. There's people that are definitely holier than me, that are more skilled than me. So it's always that question in the back of my mind, like, is what I'm seeing real? Is what I'm experiencing real? Am I smart enough or good enough to take this forward? Because it feels like some of those revelations that were gifted to me or graced to me all those years ago were given to a child, or given to someone that didn't know how to wield them yet, that had no idea what was going on. And I've spent the last over a decade now to try to catch up, to try to become worthy, to try to understand enough to become worthy of that which wants to speak through us. So these movements that were coming through me, these rituals that were happening, I felt, even though I didn't understand them, I felt that I was at least in good company of the ones that were moved by this kind of work, and all sorts of traditions, yoga being one of them, where rituals and myths possess us. And I mean, if you're a student of mythology in any way, and you listen to, especially to some of the indigenous myths, which haven't been watered down or diluted for us, they almost don't make sense. You'll feel a certain way when you listen to them. But I mean, there's Inuit myths and stories where, a woman's in a tent, and she's trying to be married off by her father, and she's found no one, but this head comes to her one day, and this, disembodied head is sitting and talking to her. She falls in love with it, but the father sees it, stabs it in the eye. It rolls away. It falls into a hole and drops down into the ocean. I mean, and you're trying to like make sense of this with the left brain, and you're like, what is this story? And there's no happy ending at the end. There's nothing for you to grasp onto. But these stories move something, and they stay with you, and you're unable to shake them. I mean, there's something in us that's older and deeper than the eye that we're familiar with. And these practices were supposed to give us an access to relate to those deeper parts of ourselves. One of the places that I went, you asked about, yeah, fascia became at least something for me to hold on to. It's like, okay, well, here's this thing that's difficult to understand, but communicates through the whole body, is with us when we're just a few cells old, and it grows with us, and it seems to be this communication that's faster than the nervous system, that connects, the pinky toe all the way to my arm. And this is what I'm experiencing, and it relates to our emotions, and it helps shape the way that we experience the world. It's almost this way that our inner world is mirrored or reflected into the outer world through our body. So I mean, this started to give me hope that maybe there was something that I could hold on to, or I could follow down in anatomy. And through that, I found Tom Myers. Fascia, he wrote Anatomy Trains, student of Ida Rolfs and Moshe Feldenkrais. So, I went and I found him, and I sat with him, and I started doing body work, with him, and working with him, and researching with him, and doing deep body work and fascial work. And one of the things that moved me most was the way that they would touch. There was almost this religious quality. And at the beginning, my left brain, or my cynic, was like, well, it's just anatomy. It's like you just go in there and you touch the right parts and you do the right thing, and the right things happen. And they were doing something else, and they couldn't explain it, but they were sitting down and breathing with the person first. They were saying things like, settle back into yourself before you touch. And there was something that I was experiencing, that depending on the way that you would touch, someone's nervous system and body would respond in a different way. What you were able to experience, what you were able to move, was very different. So again, this started to again guide my perception and where I would go to next. And that led me into, again, this concept of the other, not other, of contacting the body as this otherness. And Martin Buber's the philosophy of Martin Buber, like the I thou of the world, this animate quality of existence that we've lost, that moved me into Ian McGilchrist's hemispheric brain studies of our culture, and the difference that we have of these both of these sides of our brain, these hemispheres, and the way that the world appears very differently to the left brain as to the right brain. And the left brain tears the world down into parts and sees everything as just pieces, and it's the right brain that sees the world as this animate, living, dynamic process. But our language is in the left brain mostly. So this schism that began to happen, this Descartesian split that began to happen so many hundreds of years ago, started to give us a shift into almost a left brain hypnosis. And it makes sense, because we are so good at manipulating the resources of this world. We have so much evidence that, yeah, look what we've done. Steam engine and cars and computer chips and, and medicines. It makes sense that we would have moved away from this other way of seeing reality, when we used to be able to hold both of them. And we've moved into this left brain way of experiencing reality, and we've lost this capacity to move into this right brain animation of the world. And that moved me into, like starting to connect, because I wasn't connecting the dots yet, that mythology started to come alive, moving in this way. Like I started to understand the stories, not intellectually, but experientially. And our ideas that somehow myths are untrue, that myths are lies, is a huge misunderstanding of what myth is. I mean, myth is something that's true in pattern, not in detail. But there's intergenerational wisdom being pushed forward throughout time of, again, these stories that have tried to live themselves through us, that orient us towards the greatest good, that try to shift our relevance realizations for us to keep what's truly meaningful and important in our lives. And again, it was movement that brought me here, brought me into Jungian psychology. And I saw the way that he was addressing the unconscious. in the same way that I was addressing this other, not other in the body. He was addressing through active imagination, through deep work. He was finding that same connection into something ancient and older and other that lives within the psyche. And I mean, this work started to, when someone asked me, how did I create this? I don't feel like I did. I don't feel like I did. I feel like I've been a poor translator with clumsy words, trying to get better at explaining. Like you said, what do I call this? How do I explain this? And everybody wants the explanation, right, Peter? Everybody wants the explanation in 2 sentences that can fit in an Instagram post, that they can sell a workshop at it. And I'm like, I don't know how to do that. I barely know how to talk about this. I barely know how to talk about this. I can show you. I can help guide you into that place where you can experience hopefully experience that thing in yourself, because this isn't just a voice in me. This is something ancient and older that speaks to all of us. One of the things that Jung said to one of his patients that came in and asked him, it's like, well, I'm going through this thing. It's like, well, what should I do? And Jung looked at him and was like, I haven't the slightest idea. Let's consult your dreams. Basically saying there's something in you that knows more. Another quote from Jung that I use often is this: it is useless to preach the light if no one can see it. It's much more needful to teach the art of sensing or the art of seeing. So a lot of my work has been to help people feel again, to help them see the compensational patterns, see the restrictions, to help them shift through intimate contact with the body. One of the things that allows us to shift from left to right brain is this intimate connection with the experiential phenomenology of the body. That's one of these things that's much more connected to the right. It's also with the work of John Vervaeke and relevance realization machinery, where we have certain lenses and we filter the world through these lenses. And we only see what we consider relevant or important. And that's shaped and shifted through our upbringing, through our culture, through our traumas, through all of these things. So in order to be able to transcend our relevance realization and be able to see a wider world, we have to be able to realize first that we're in this hypnosis, and to be able to, instead of looking through these filters, to be able to see them. And now, I mean, we're talking about, in yoga terminology, Maya, to be able to see past Maya, to realize that it's there. So I'd say there's a humbling aspect where I don't believe I'm in any way smart enough to have come up with any of this. I believe that I've been pulled towards it, and that inner aspirational or angelic voice that draws us towards the I that I know that it knows that I could be if I was everything that I could be. And I believe we all have that thing that's pulling us towards that full capacity of what it means to be holy. And I use holy not in like being good, but in the root of the word whole, to be whole, to be as whole as we can. And that thing, if we're lucky, that didn't feel lucky for a long time, but if we're lucky, it acts like a judge as well. And it won't let us rest unless we're moving in the direction of that which is where our orientation should be, towards the greatest good.
I I think the communication skills that you now possess, just listening to that last 10 minutes of fluid articulation of your experience, is I mean, it's not that your work is done, but you've done amazing work to be where you are. And this experience for me, and Crystal, I'm sure you maybe have the same, but
I'm just over here like, holy shit.
no, well, just this podcast was a fluke. It was like a coincidence that, I use this word a lot, coincidence, which in English language is like two rare things that somehow magically come together. But the root of coincidence is two things that fit perfectly together, coincide. And Crystal and I coming together was a crazy coincidence. And this podcast, another crazy coincidence. And the guests that we've had on the show so far, like yourself, just taking it to the next level. And I don't know if you've written a book, but some of the guests have written books. And one of them is a guy named John Stirk. And he's going to be on the show, I think, tomorrow, or we're going to record tomorrow, the next day. Do you know this name, John Stirk? He's an English. So he was an osteopath, and he had this whole intellect side of his path, but he then was also a yogi. And he's totally into connective tissue, and he talks about softness and expansion and fascia. And as a matter of fact, I want to read you something that I just read last night. And I think it's so appropriate for what you just said. This is in this book that he has called Deeper Still. There are no courses, books, teachers, or methods that can transport us across the fine line between conditioned and unconditioned responses. Only we, quietly and unaided, can sense our way beyond the threshold into as yet undiscovered space. So my journey and this word levity is about creating space. And just anatomically, it's about creating softness in our bodies. How do we access softness? We have to have an understanding of fascia. And my background isn't the study of it, but I've been the recipient of Rolfing for 30 years. And my Rolfer here in San Luis Obispo was my guru. Just symbolically my guru into softness, because he was, pulling those tissues, fluid movement that was resisting, was glued, was stuck together. So this idea of softness creates the space, and the space is the prerequisite, let's call it, for intuition. It's the prerequisite for what you describe in a way, this myth, this knowledge, this intellect that is moving through us, but we have to prepare to receive it in a way. And that's our work, as what I and Crystal and I have called this inner teacher journey. Like, we have to work. We can't just sit on the couch and wait for it to come in. To
Well,
create
what does that
space.
mean? What does that mean to work?
It requires in the beginning some dedication, some passion, and then it evolves into some kind of discipline. And listening to the way that your yoga journey went, Carlos, I can just sense that dedication and discipline that you had to ask the questions, and that you just keep asking questions. I've done the same process, and my favorite question is this true? Like, whatever I'm experiencing right now, is it true? Like, is this really happening? And oftentimes it's not true. It's not true to the I that you also refer to. What is the I that is not me? And that's the mystery. That's the, I don't know. It's like, what happens after death? It's a similar existential inquiry, and I'm driven by it. I don't know, Crystal. I have a sense that you're driven by it too.
Hey, I really like being in this position because I'm reminded of that quote that says, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And I'm in the right room. I'm in the right room, and this journey is just starting for me. And I guess a question for both of you is, maybe it's my Ayurvedic dosha, maybe it's my zodiac sign, whatever it is. But I find myself it's difficult for me to separate from routine or from habit or from what's been this repetitive behavior that I've created. And so even when I'm trying to ask questions and listen and make space for, like what you were saying, Carlos, this voice that wants to speak through us, sometimes I find like in this in between where I'm moving away from what I know and I'm trying to move into this other thing. But then sometimes it's almost like the transmission isn't clear. It's like, and I'm waiting for it's like, it's difficult. You know what I mean?
Yes. There's in the Arthurian legends, in the Arthurian myths, the knights prepare together. They work together. They train together. They ride out together towards the forest. And I'm talking about in the Grail, some of the Grail legends. But once they reach the forest, they separate, and each one has to go to the place in the forest that's darkest for them. The way that you know that you're on your path and not someone else's is that there's no beep, that it is unknown, that it's mysterious. I mean, that's part of that I mean, it's not an easy place to be. That's the Negredo in alchemy. That's the dark night of the soul. That's the place, that's the ashes before the phoenix rises. I mean, and it's not a comfortable, place to be. And we've lost so much when we've lost myth, and we've lost so much when we've lost gatekeepers into our transition phases, because even things like sacrifice and difficulty we've lost our taste for them, as if somehow things always need to be comfortable or things always need to be soft, that when we're experiencing something that's difficult or sad or hard or painful, like what we're trying to do is immediately trying to ease the symptoms of that, instead of understanding that this is a necessary stage to that which comes next, that you're in good company in those places. And here's some stories. I mean, myth isn't something that happened to someone a long time ago. I mean, myth is that which is living itself through us, right in these moments. You asked about the work. There's in alchemy, there's this concept that first there's this saying, and it says, be therefore of the quality that you wish your work to be. Be therefore of the quality that you wish your work to be. And one of the alchemical writers, Dorn was speaking, and I'll paraphrase this, and butcher it a little bit. But Dorn was speaking about this work that alchemy. I mean, have you ever tried to read anything about like alchemy? It's a huge frustration. And it's a huge frustration because they didn't agree with each other. Almost none of them agreed with anything that others were saying, because they were being possessed by something that was beyond them. They thought that they were working with materials. They thought that they were, trying to take base materials and turn them into gold. And that's what they thought they set out to do. But what they realized is what was going on is that they were projecting the contents of their own psyche outwards into material. And what really started to happen is an inner transformation started to happen. And they were projecting all of this internal work onto the materials that they were making. So they didn't have recipes. They weren't like, well, do this, take a quarter, a teaspoon of this and put it together. They didn't have those. They had a very rough idea of what they were doing. And one of the things that Dorn was writing was, if someone brand new tries to take this and do exactly what I did, it won't work. There will be no transformation. You do the work, and through your commitment, dedication, and love for the work first changes something in you in order for you to be able to transform something through the work. And that's the idea of, we orient ourselves towards it, humbly, or humbly, sometimes arrogantly. We orient ourselves to us. If we're lucky, we get humbled by it. And something happens to us. And then when something happens to us, our perspective on what is going on shifts, and we become this observer to something. I don't know if I've gotten rid of any of my quote unquote qualities through this. I don't, like, more spiritual. My shadows are all still there. Like the same things, the same stuff that I had before, the same fears, the same doubts. But the way that I'm relating to those things, instead of it being something that's wrong, it's like, well, this is the work. Like, this is the canvas of what's trying to come out. And I'm an observer to what's going on. And now I'm in service of the work instead of the other way around. Instead of trying to use biohacking because I want to feel happy all the time, and then something comes in and I do some kind of breath in order to, manipulate my emotions into something. I mean, you can do that in a sense. You can give yourself these symptomatic experiences through some of the work that I do and I'll teach people. But truly, if you really do this work long enough, that's not what this work is about. This work is about creating space between you and the experience, and become the observer of, what is this that's breathing through me? What is this that wants to speak? Like, your dreams will start to speak in some strange ways. Peter talked about coincidences, and I would even use the word synchronicities. You start to see things that are related in ways that you couldn't even imagine. You start to see the world in a completely different way, and that idea of, be therefore of the quality that you wish your work to be, that something happens to you. And believe me, this is not an easy place to be. And that's another thing. Well, yoga is just this easy practice, and you do it, and you become healthier. And the work that I do with flutists, I moved away a bit, not a bit. I moved away from, I'd say there's fluidist inspired yoga, which is How do you use fluidus and these concepts of movement that I'm teaching people in order to have an asana practice that's better for the body, healthier, and maybe gives you a deeper connection to something. But there's this other work that I think is an umbrella above just yoga. And I'd say just yoga, meaning just our modern conceptions of yoga, which is truly this quest for the experience of that other, the experience of that which we used to use placeholder words like the divine and God, which we've misunderstood. If you have a definition for God, that's not what I'm talking about. Because it's that mystery that's beyond all conception, that's living us and breathing us, that we can't fully grasp or manipulate, but we can relate to it in a way that gives meaning to our life, that we're a finite being with the capacity to relate to the infinite. We're halfway between, heaven and the hummus of the earth. Like, we're stretched out. If like the symbology of the cross in our traditions is the vertical and the horizontal. Like, I mean, we're in the horizontal of our material lives while having this vertical access up. We're like this incarnation, like the mythology in our traditions about the annunciation of an angel coming down to this woman and asking, would you be willing to be the vessel for the incarnation of the coming God? I mean, that's, again, if we're taking myth seriously as intergenerational wisdom being pushed forward through time, that means it's not trying to tell us, well, here's a really cool story about what happened to this woman one time. Is this happening in you? Is something trying to be born through you that you can be the midwife for? That you can be the tender, the one that tends or shepherds this inner garden and become therefore the quality that you wish your work to be. Again, in our same tradition, in our same Western tradition, the idea of the temple of the Holy Ghost. What was it talking about? It was about, again, becoming this loving of the work, where we're becoming this thing that we allow space for that which wants to be born through us. And what that is, instead of trying to minimize or create straw man arguments, both atheist and reductionist scientific minds do the same thing, where we make the others a straw man argument. The atheists take the worst of religion and argue against the worst of religion. The fundamentalist religionists take the worst of science and argue against the worst of science. Both of them are seeing the world in black and white. But what are these concepts behind these words that we've strawmanned? It's not just God, but what is it that's between? What is it that lives in the mystery that's beyond? I mean, we don't even know what consciousness is, where it comes from. Is it an emergent capacity of matter, or is it something that's essential that came before matter? We don't even know how it is that we think. And if we don't know that, if that itself is a mystery, how I'm talking to you right now and making small mouth sounds and going blah, 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 and these small mouth sounds travel through space and time into your ears, and you take these mouth sounds and you translate them somehow, and somehow we get into each other's heads like this, and we understand that we're doing that somehow. We cannot even grok how it is that we're doing that. This world is a mystery to us. There's an essence of the sacred and enchanted world that we lost connection to. So using movement and breath, not as a manipulation, but as a sacrament, also almost as a ritual, to be able to allow our perceptions to clear so we can see a larger world, so we can again orient ourselves towards a relationship with the universe that nourishes the spirit, but that satisfies the intellect and reason. Not to put it to the side with blind belief, but to bring our intellect and our reason to bear. I came to this as a cynic and a doubter, like doubting Thomas. I was questioning everything. Like Peter said, some of the stuff that I was seeing, I questioned it and it fell apart and it crumbled. But something still stood despite my best attempts to tear it down. And we must reckon with that which still stands. So we can bring everything that we are to bear on something and do our best to tear it down. And then like Thomas, then we might be the only apostle in all the mythic stories that was able to physically touch the mythological resurrection was Thomas. Because Thomas said, I won't believe unless I put my hands in the wounds and I put my hand in the side, unless I physically touch the resurrection, I will not believe. You guys are all delusional. And in that moment where they're in the story where their master appeared again, and Thomas was like, oh shit, damn it, the things that I've said. And what did the master say? The master said, Thomas, come here. Go. Put your hands here. Put your hands here. You can feel it. So that story comes down to us through interpretation, but something in these that wrote these stories, again, remember, they didn't understand the full meaning, the layers of implicit meaning that they were pushing across in these stories. There's something about being the doubter that allows us to confront and encounter reality. And that's what we're looking for that encounter with the greater personality, with the self, with the capital S, with the other, with the Atman. I mean, we get stuck on one tradition, but we're all at our best. We're trying to come to terms with something that's beyond our individual capacity to fully grasp
Or label.
or label.
Yeah. I think this interview, like our previous one, has a lot of seeds for season 2. Like, Carlos, we're going to have you back.
Yeah,
I
for
mean,
sure.
it's been an hour and it feels like we're just starting. And I'm just delighted to meet you. And
Yeah.
I'm inspired by everything that you've said. There's not one moment in your whole conversation where I wasn't just on the edge of my seat waiting for the next word. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I
Thank you.
was
Go
gonna say
ahead.
I'm glad that came through, because I mean what you're saying is I don't feel myself outside of this work. Like what you're feeling is what I feel, where it's this awe-inducing something, and it's not always easy, but that edge of the seat thing, I know the feeling.
Fantastic. We designed a logo for this podcast with a icon of a labyrinth, which is such a perfect metaphor in the fact that the only choice you make is the choice to move into it. And once you get there, it takes you in every direction, but there's only one path to the center. And we also found an image of a night sky reflecting off a lake as the backdrop for our websites and stuff. And there's shooting stars. And the symbology of this background was also coincidental, just showed up when we signed up for our website. And the website host used this image and we found it and we're using it. And it's fantastic. Just as a symbol of this mystery, the awness and the mystery of this inward journey. So thank you for this opportunity for us here and also the listeners out there to just hear it from someone who's on this journey and quite a long ways on the journey, and you've still got so much more life. I can feel it in you. I can't wait to have this conversation again.
Thank you.
I'm
Thank you,
glad you're
Peter.
here, and I
You're
hope you'll
welcome.
come back.
I'll definitely come back. This was fantastic. Um, there's something about this kind of work that it's not always easy to sit down and talk at this length in this world, the way that it goes and the speed of it. So this is an honor for me too, to be able to share with both of you and with your listeners as well. So it's an honor. I'd be happy to be back. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode. Be well and stay open to the teacher within. If you've enjoyed our time together, follow or subscribe and stay tuned for upcoming chats you don't want to miss.